Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into the dim corridors of medieval Europe, a world that hid more than it revealed. For 700 years, 50 secrets about women's lives have slept beneath dust and silence. Secrets so dark, so forbidden, that they were never written down, only whispered from mother to daughter in candlelight when the night was deepest. Tonight, we'll walk behind castle walls, into peasant cottages heavy with smoke, and through monastery chambers where forbidden prayers still linger. This isn't the fairy tale version of history, it's the truth they didn't want you to know. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of storytelling. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? I love seeing how this community spans across the world, connected by curiosity and a love for stories long forgotten. Now, let's begin. The year was 1347. November's chill still lingered inside the thick stone walls of Ashford Castle. Outside, the sky was the color of ash, neither night nor morning yet. Far away, a bell tolled from the abbey. 1, 2, 3 slow notes floating through the fog. Lady Catherine opened her eyes. The air around her was heavy, sharp, and cold enough to sting her lungs. She lay beside her husband, Lord William, whose breath reeked of ale and old sweat. The sheets were rough wool, and though they looked fine, they had not been washed since midsummer. Catherine pressed her lips together, resisting the urge to cough. She turned slightly, facing the stone wall instead of her husband. Her long linen nightdress clung to her skin. The dampness made her shiver. 5 months. It had been 5 months since her last bath. She remembered the day clearly. The servants had heated bucket after bucket of water, pouring it into a wooden tub lined with cloth. The water had gone cold before she even stepped in. Afterward, she caught a fever that nearly killed her. The castle physician blamed the bath. Water opens the pores, he said, and invites death. Since then, she dared not risk it again. The winter wind seeped through the cracks around the window shutters. Beside the bed, 2 dogs slept curled together for warmth. The chamber smelled of wax, sweat, and damp stone. A single candle flickered on the bedside table, throwing a trembling light over the carved wooden posts of the bed. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the servants stirring, boots scraping on the flagstones, buckets clattering. A rooster crowed faintly through the mist. Catherine sighed. The first thought that came to her mind was not prayer, not gratitude, but the dull ache in her lower belly. Her courses were coming. She could already feel the heaviness between her thighs. Quietly, she slipped one hand under the blanket and touched the bundle of old linen cloth she kept by her side. Torn from worn dresses, washed too many times to count, and stiff from lye soap. That was her only protection. She would have to fold it and press it between her legs later, hidden under the thick layers of her gown. She sat up slowly, wincing as the cold air hit her bare arms. The fire had died hours ago, leaving only gray ash. She rang a small bell. Within moments, a maid entered, barefoot, half asleep, clutching a small metal basin of icy water. "For washing, my lady," the girl whispered, her breath forming little clouds. Catherine nodded. The water wasn't for bathing, it was for wiping. Face, neck, underarms, hands. She dipped a linen cloth into the basin, wrung it out, and pressed it to her cheeks. The shock of cold made her gasp, but she did it again out of habit. Cleanliness, as much as one could manage, was a matter of pride. When she was done, the maid brought a jar of white cream. "Your face powder, my lady." Catherine opened the lid. The smell was faintly sweet, but underneath it lingered the scent of metal. The cream was made from vinegar, white lead, and powdered chalk. Every noblewoman's secret weapon. She rubbed it gently into her skin. The pale mask it created made her look angelic in the candlelight, but her fingers tangled. The lead bit into her skin like invisible frost. Still, she smiled faintly. In this world, beauty was armor. Even poison was a luxury. 3 miles from Ashford Castle, the world smelled of wet straw and smoke. The rain had been falling since before dawn, steady and thin, turning the path outside into a river of mud. Inside a small thatched hut, Marie was already awake. She hadn't really slept at all. Her belly, round and hard with the weight of her unborn child, made it impossible to find rest. Every turn sent a shock of pain through her back. She shifted again, pressing a hand to the small of her spine, breathing through clenched teeth. From the next room came the sound of her husband snoring, low, wet, and heavy. Then, a thud, the sound of a blow, and a child crying. Marie froze. "Pierre," she whispered, but the word caught in her throat. Her 4-year-old son whimpered, followed by the slam of a wooden bowl. She wanted to run in, to protect him, but fear held her in place. The baby inside her kicked. She winced. "Please, not now," she muttered to herself. Violence in the house was as ordinary as the morning frost. No one in the village would interfere. "A man's temper is God's will," the priest had said once. And so Marie learned to endure it, like cold, like hunger, like childbirth. Through the cracks in the wall, the smell of damp hay drifted in. She rose slowly, wrapping a coarse wool shawl around her shoulders. The floor was nothing but packed dirt. Her bare feet sank slightly into it as she walked toward the adjoining shed. There, among the cows, it was warmer. Their breath hung in the air like fog. She sat on a small wooden stool beside one of them, resting her head against its side. The animal's warmth spread through her skin. "At least you don't shout," she whispered to it. She reached for the bucket and began milking with slow, practiced motions. The rhythm calmed her, the sound soft and steady, milk hitting metal, heartbeats syncing with the creature's slow breathing. The cow flicked its tail lazily, brushing her arm. For a few moments, Marie allowed herself to forget the bruises, the fear, the ache in her spine. But the calm never lasted long. A cough shook her body, deep and dry. Her lungs burned from nights spent in smoke. The hut had no chimney, only a small hole in the roof that let the rain in but trapped the soot. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and stared at the gray light creeping through the cracks in the door. The baby inside her shifted again, a slow, deliberate movement. She bit her lip. This would be her fourth child. 2 were already buried behind the cottage, tiny wooden crosses half swallowed by weeds. "Please," she whispered, "just let this one live." There was no midwife in the village, only old Mother Ansel, half-blind and trembling, who used herbs and prayer to deliver babies. Sometimes the prayers worked, sometimes they didn't. Marie knew that when her time came, she would scream into the dark, alone except for the sound of cattle breathing. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the faint ripple of life within. A tear rolled down her cheek, mixing with the dirt on her skin. Outside, the rooster crowed weakly again. Dawn had come, but the sun would not show its face. Marie poured the milk into a clay jug, set it aside, and whispered to herself, "Another day." Then, from outside, came a faint knock on the door. It wasn't her husband. The rhythm was gentle, secretive. 3 short taps, pause, then 1 long. Her heart leapt. She knew that signal. It was from the abbey, Sister Hildegard's mark. Before the first light touched the abbey roof, Sister Hildegard was already awake. The convent bell had not yet rung. Silence hung over the stone corridors like breath held too long. Her small chamber smelled faintly of dried herbs and wax, lavender to calm the nerves, myrrh to mask the odor of medicine hidden behind the floorboards. She sat at her desk, a single candle flickering beside a wooden crucifix. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened a narrow drawer and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside were vials of cloudy liquid, dried roots, and a small pouch of powder, her forbidden craft. The church called it witchcraft. To her, it was mercy. A knock came, soft, urgent, the pattern unmistakable. 3 short taps, 1 long. The signal. Marie had arrived. Hildegard rose, her black robe whispering against the stone floor. She crossed to the door, unlatched it carefully, and peered down the corridor. Empty. The other sisters were still asleep. She slipped outside, her bare feet silent against the cold flagstones. Through the courtyard, mist curled around the well like ghosts. Beyond it, a wooden door led to the garden, and beyond that, the back gate where peasants sometimes came for confession. Hildegard pushed it open just enough to let a figure through. Marie stood there, soaked to the bone, shawl dripping, face pale as ash. In her arms, she held a small clay cup. "It hurts," Marie whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't. Not another." Hildegard looked at her belly, then at her eyes. The decision weighed like lead. "You know what this means," she said softly. "If they find out." "They won't," Marie cut her off, clutching the nun's sleeve. "Please, sister,
I beg you." Hildegard nodded once. "Come." She led Marie to the herb room, a narrow cell lined with shelves of jars, each labeled in Latin. The air was sharp with the smell of vinegar and rosemary. Hildegard set the bundle on the table and unwrapped it. "This," she said, holding up a small vial of dark liquid, "will bring pain first, then silence." Marie swallowed hard. "And afterward?" "You rest for 3 days, no fire, no work, and you pray, not for forgiveness, but for strength." Hildegard hesitated before adding, "Drink it before dawn." A faint noise echoed in the hall. Footsteps. The two women froze. Hildegard blew out the candle. The room plunged into darkness. Voices drifted from the chapel, 2 novices whispering prayers. Hildegard's heart pounded. If they were caught, there would be no mercy. The punishment for such acts was fire. Slowly, the footsteps faded. The silence returned. Hildegard relit the candle, her hands shaking. "Go now," she whispered, "and remember, if anyone asks, you came to confess." Marie nodded, tears glistening in the dim light. She took the vial, kissed Hildegard's hand, and slipped out through the side door. When she was gone, Hildegard sank into the chair, her breath uneven. She looked at the crucifix on the wall. "Lord, forgive me," she murmured, "for saving what you did not intend to save." The candlelight danced over her face, part shadow, part resolve. In the stillness, she heard the morning bell at last. 1, 2, 3. The day had begun, and with it, another secret.
The morning sun was pale and thin, barely cutting through the mist that rolled over the fields. Sister Hildegard pulled the hood of her black cloak tighter, her breath forming small clouds in the cold. In her wicker basket, between loaves of bread and sprigs of thyme, was a small pouch of medicine, hidden, precious, dangerous. Each step along the muddy road felt heavier than the last. The village of Ashford lay still, the only sounds a distant dog barking and the squeak of cartwheels. As she passed, women glanced up from washing or sweeping and gave her the faintest nods. No words, just the language of survival. A scarf tied with the knot slightly off-center. That meant, "I need help." A bracelet of twisted twine on the left wrist. "It's safe to talk." The women of the village had built a world beneath the one men saw, a web of signs and whispers, invisible yet strong. A woman passing another might brush her hand gently against her sleeve, leaving a trace of touch that said, "He's dangerous tonight." And in their lullabies, those soft songs sung to crying infants, there were recipes, coded in rhyme, the measure of poppy milk, the timing of mandrake root, the herbs that eased pain when no priest could. Hildegard carried those songs like prayers. They were the scripture she believed in. By the time she reached Marie's cottage, the air had turned heavy with dread. The smell hit her first, iron and sweat, fear and smoke. Inside, shadows moved. Marie lay on a pile of damp straw, face pale as candle wax, her hair clinging to her forehead. Old Mother Ansel knelt beside her, shaking her head. 18 hours, she muttered. The baby won't come. God's will. Hildegard's jaw tightened. No, she said quietly. That's not God. That's ignorance. She set her basket down,
pushed up her sleeves, and poured wine vinegar over her hands. The old woman made the sign of the cross, horrified. "That won't help." "It keeps death away," Hildegard replied. She reached into the basket, pulled out a small vial of almond oil, and warmed it in her palms before rubbing it gently on Marie's swollen belly. "Drink this," she whispered, holding out a small cup. "It's from the poppy flower. It will ease you." Marie's lips trembled as she swallowed. 10 minutes later, the shaking eased. Her breath steadied. Hildegard began to press her hands along the belly, slow, firm, guiding the child inside to turn. The movement was delicate, something no male physician had ever learned, because no man was allowed to touch a woman this way. "Breathe with me," she murmured. Marie obeyed. Sweat rolled down her temples. The room filled with the scent of herbs and fear. Hildegard wiped the blood with a cloth soaked in honey, nature's antiseptic, something she had learned long before she wore a habit. "Now, push." Marie screamed, again and again, until after 2 endless hours, a sound pierced the silence, a baby's cry, high, thin, alive. The old woman gasped, crossing herself. Hildegard smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. She tied the cord, cut it with a knife heated over the fire, and pressed the newborn into its mother's trembling arms. "She's breathing. She's here." But peace never lasted long in this world. The door creaked open. A man's shadow filled the frame. Thomas, red-eyed, drunk. He hissed, "What have you done to my wife?" "Witch." Hildegard froze. She knew that tone. She had heard it before, moments before torches were lit.
While thunder rumbled faintly beyond the hills, the world inside Ashford Castle seemed calm, almost too calm. In the solar chamber, sunlight poured through stained glass windows, scattering ruby and sapphire hues across embroidered cushions. Lady Catherine sat among 6 other noblewomen, their fingers moving rhythmically, needles glinting in the morning light. From afar, they looked like saints at prayer. Up close, they were conspirators. The tapestry on the frame appeared to be a garden of flowers, but Catherine knew it was more than that. Each thread color meant something. Blue was for safety. Red marked danger. Green pointed to a safe convent. The women were mapping escape routes, sanctuaries for wives who needed to vanish, for girls promised to cruel men. "My husband thinks I'm embroidering lilies," whispered Lady Agnes beside her. "He doesn't know it's a road." Catherine smiled faintly without lifting her eyes. He must never know. Their voices were barely breaths, yet in those breaths they shared power, quiet, patient, disguised as obedience. When men rode to war, women ruled what they left behind. They managed the silver, the servants, the letters that shaped alliances. Catherine's mother once told her, "A woman's mind must be sharper than her needle." She remembered that now, with every stitch. But her concentration broke when the door opened and a maid hurried in. The girl's cheeks were flushed, her apron stained with soot. She knelt by Catherine's chair and whispered, "My lady, Sister Hildegard, she's in trouble." The blacksmith's husband, Thomas, he's shouting, says she's a witch. He's going to the priest." For a moment, the room froze. The hum of embroidery stopped. Catherine looked at the women around her, all still, eyes lowered but tense. Hildegard was one of them, part of the hidden network that bound noblewomen to peasants, abbesses to maids. She was the healer who treated them all, no matter rank. If she fell, the whole chain would shatter. "How long ago?" Catherine asked quietly. "An hour, maybe less," the maid replied. Catherine stood, her needle slipping from her hand. "Continue," she said softly to the group. "Finish the lilies." The women nodded. They knew what that meant. Finish the message, complete the map. Catherine lifted the edge of her tapestry, folded it over, and rose. Her reflection caught in the stained glass, pale skin under white powder, lips faintly red from crushed cochineal. She looked every bit the noblewoman society demanded. But under that mask, her pulse was steady and fierce. She turned to her lady-in-waiting. "Prepare my horse." "My lady," she stammered, "Lord William will—" "He's at council till noon. That gives me 1 hour." Her eyes glimmered with something between fear and resolve. She wrapped the embroidered cloth around her arm, a piece of beauty concealing rebellion, and stepped into the sunlight that painted her in shards of red and gold. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell struck 11. The courtyard swallowed the sound of Catherine's boots as she crossed the flagstones, the cold morning light sharpening every edge of the castle like a blade. A stable boy brought her mare, the animal's breath blooming white in the air. Catherine swung into the saddle with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned to ride in secret lessons when her governess pretended not to see. "No attendance," she told the boy, "and if Lord William asks, I'm at the chapel." The boy hesitated, then nodded. She pressed her heels and the mare leapt forward, hooves drumming over the drawbridge and into the wet road beyond. Fields unfurled in gray sheets, hedgerows glittered with rain, and the village crouched ahead like a cluster of dark thoughts. As she rode, she ran her thumb over the signet ring hidden in her glove, Lord William's seal, power, if she dared to wield it. The bell struck once from the church. The sound hung in the fog like a warning. She slowed when she reached the first cottages. Women looked up from their chores and glanced away again, but not before Catherine caught the signals. A scarf knot drawn tight and high, danger near. A strand of red thread woven into a sleeve. Keep moving, you're watched. The network breathed around her, unseen. The same web that stitched lilies into maps and turned lullabies into medicine. She reached Marie's hut to find a knot of men gathered outside, faces flushed from ale and righteousness. Thomas stood at the center, broad-shouldered, knuckles raw, a crucifix swinging at his throat like a verdict. Old Mother Ansel lurked near the door, eyes darting with the skittish fear of someone who had seen too many winters end badly. "Step aside," she said, voice level, rein steady in one hand, embroidered cloth wrapped around her arm like a banner. Thomas sneered. "My lady thinks a pretty cloth can change God's will." He spat into the mud. "The nun poisoned my wife.
I'll have the priest bind her for witchcraft." The word rolled through the crowd like a spark. Catherine let the silence count 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, then lifted her gloved hands so they could all see the signet ring. "I am Lady of Ashford," she said, each syllable chosen like a blade. "By my husband's seal, any accusation in this fief passes first through our hall. Sister Hildegard is summoned to the castle chapel for inquiry." She met Thomas's eyes. "If you defy that order, you defy your lord." A murmur rippled. Authority could still silence hunger and rage, if only for a moment. Thomas's jaw worked. "The priest has the scriptures, and I have witnesses," she replied, nodding toward the doorway. Marie's weak cry reached them, the thin, astonished mule of the newborn layered over it, life stitched to life in the smallest voice. "Your wife and child breathe because of that nun." She turned her mare slightly so the crowd had to shift or be trampled, then lowered her voice for Thomas alone. "You will not make a widow of her with your pride." For a heartbeat, the brute in him flashed like teeth. Then someone shouted from the lane, a boy running hard, cassock flapping behind him like a shadow. "Father Bernard is coming!" Panic trembled through the knot of men. The priest, once he arrived with scripture and incense in the weight of Rome, would bless their fear and make it a sentence. Catherine measured the angles. If Hildegard left now under noble summons, she might be shielded by custom. If the priest saw her still here, he would claim jurisdiction and turn mercy into heresy. Catherine flicked her gaze toward the women watching from doorways. A shawl shifted. 2 small knots at the nape, safe passage by the mill road. A twine bracelet, palm up. The back path is clear. The web tightened, ready. "Bring Sister Hildegard out," Catherine called, and when the door opened, the nun stepped into the gray light, face pale but set. Catherine moved the mare sideways, forming a living wall between Hildegard and the men. "You come with me," she said to the nun, then to the crowd. "Any man who lays a hand on her lays a hand on me and on the house of Ashford." Thunder muttered far off, as if the hills themselves weighed the claim. For a flicker of time, it might have worked. Then iron clanged at the end of the lane. Father Bernard appeared astride a cart, acolytes clutching a lantern and a bound book, his eyes fixed on the black habit, then on Catherine's ring, then back again. "My lady," he said, voice smooth as wet stone, "the church will take this soul into our care." The crowd shifted toward his certainty. Catherine felt the hour collapsing. She could bow, retreat into safety, let the priest gather Hildegard like fuel for a pyre history would pretend not to see. Or she could draw the blade she had hidden all morning, not steel, but truth sharpened in embroidery and whispers. She raised her chin. "Then hear this," she said, and reached for the folded tapestry on her arm. As the bell began to toll the second time, Catherine pulled the cloth open to reveal not lilies, but roads, red and blue and green, a map of sanctuaries stitched by women's hands. Gasps cracked the air. Thomas swore. The priest's mouth thinned. Catherine felt the decision pour through her like light through stained glass. "I claim right of sanctuary," she said, voice carrying, "under Ashford's protection and before God who hears women as well as men." Father Bernard's lantern swung, casting the cross across her face like a scar. "Choose carefully, my lady," he murmured. "One path saves a nun, the other burns your name." Catherine did not look away. The bell tolled a third time. She drew breath to choose.
Thomas was shouting before Catherine even dismounted. The air around the cottage trembled with tension and fear. Sister Hildegard stood at the doorway, her cloak torn by the wind, hands raised to calm a crowd too frightened to understand. The villagers had gathered again, faces drawn, eyes fixed on the argument unfolding before them. Catherine's boots struck the ground, the sharp sound silencing the chaos. "Thomas," she said evenly, her tone calm but firm. "Kneel." The command hung in the air. He turned, startled, eyes landing on the golden crest embroidered on her sleeve, the hawk of House Ashford. His anger faltered. The women near the well lowered their heads. Even the children fell silent. "You accuse a woman under my protection?" Catherine's voice was low, controlled. "You forget yourself." Thomas hesitated, then bowed his head, the authority of her name heavier than any weapon. "My lady, I meant no harm." "Then remember your place," Catherine said softly. Her gaze moved across the villagers. "And all of you? How long will you stand silent while ignorance decides who deserves compassion?" The crowd avoided her eyes. Some nodded slightly. The weight of her words lingered. Catherine turned to Hildegard. "Come," she said. "You're leaving with me." Hildegard's eyes widened. "The church may question." "Let them. I'll answer." She helped Hildegard onto her horse, and together they rode away under the pale noon light. The village behind them faded into the mist. Catherine felt the chill in her chest, the cold that comes when courage outruns safety. The great hall of Ashford glowed with firelight. The smell of roasted meat, wine, and spice filled the air. Catherine sat beside Lord William at the long table of oak, surrounded by nobles and noise. He tore bread with his hands, speaking loudly between bites. Forks lay unused. Some still called them unholy tools because of their shape. "They say that none from the abbey will be questioned tomorrow," he said, with a laugh that carried authority and wine. Catherine smiled politely. "Then justice will be done," she said softly. Around them, men exchanged stories of hunting and politics. The talk was loud, the laughter rough. Servants refilled their cups. The wine was strong enough to hide the taste of food long kept by the fire. Catherine took small bites, careful and measured. Women at the table always ate less. Modesty and restraint were marks of virtue. She sipped lightly from her cup, pretending to listen. William leaned closer, his tone shifting. "You were in the village today." It wasn't a question. His gaze was sharp. Catherine felt her pulse rise, but kept her smile. "Yes, my lord," she said evenly. "I brought bread for the poor, as a service to our faith." He studied her,
then nodded with a grin. "A devout wife, good." His laughter returned, and the table followed. Catherine sat still, the laughter ringing like distant thunder. She looked up at the beams blackened by time and thought how some prisons had walls and some had chairs of silk.
In the small cottage, the scent of milk and wood smoke lingered. Marie held her newborn child close, a tiny baby girl with eyes not yet open to the world. She smiled faintly through her exhaustion. Outside, Thomas and his neighbors spoke loudly, their laughter echoing like distant thunder. "Marie, come!" his voice called from outside. "The meal's waiting." She tried to rise, her body was weak, but she steadied herself and walked carefully toward the door. Before stepping out, she looked down at the child once more and whispered, "May you grow stronger than the world that greets you." In the distance, the abbey bell tolled 2 o'clock. Sister Hildegard entered through its gate, her cloak damp from the ride. The abbess awaited her, tall and stern. "Sister Hildegard," she said evenly, "where have you been?" Hildegard bowed her head. "I went to deliver bread, Mother." The abbess's eyes narrowed. "Do not hide behind half-truths. I've heard what happened in the village." Hildegard lowered her gaze. "Then I will face what must come." But the abbess closed the door quietly, and her voice softened. "Do you remember what they once called me?" She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a small star-shaped scar on her wrist, the same mark Hildegard carried. "You're not alone," she said, "and you will never be, not while I still breathe." She let the sleeve fall and whispered, "Next time, be careful. Mercy needs silence to survive." The bell continued to ring, its sound washing over the village, the castle, and every woman who had learned how to wear her mask and still keep her heart awake. The afternoon sun stretched across the stone floor of Lady Catherine's chamber, painting long stripes of gold and dust. She sat near the window, her daughter, Eleanor, a bright-eyed 7-year-old, beside her. Both bent over a piece of linen stretched tight on a wooden frame. From afar, it looked like embroidery, but the patterns weren't flowers or vines. They were paths, hidden messages disguised as beauty. "Listen carefully, my little one," Catherine whispered, her needle dipping in and out of the cloth. "Blue means safety, a convent or a friend's home. Red means danger, places where women vanish. And yellow means help, someone who will listen." Eleanor's small hands fumbled with the thread. "But why do I have to learn this, Mother? Why not just be happy?" Catherine paused. For a moment, she couldn't find her voice. Then, softly, "Because, my darling, happiness is fragile. The world isn't always kind to those who are gentle, but we can survive, even when it isn't fair. And survival is its own kind of strength." The little girl nodded, eyes wide, though she couldn't yet understand. Catherine smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "One day," she whispered, "you'll use these colors to find your way home."
Around them, the castle murmured, the low hum of servants, the echo of distant bells, the soft breathing of a world that never truly slept. Outside, the wind turned colder, and the shadows began to lengthen. Catherine folded the linen, placing it gently in a chest beside her. She didn't know it yet, but the map her daughter learned to stitch would one day save more lives than any sword her husband had ever wielded.
A few miles away, the cottage smelled of smoke and oatmeal. Marie knelt by the fire, stirring a pot that simmered slowly. Her body ached, but she moved carefully, without complaint. Behind her, Thomas sat on a stool, nursing a cup of ale, muttering to himself. "Next time we'll have a son," he said, voice thick with weariness. Marie nodded without turning. The sound of the baby's soft breathing filled the corner of the room. Outside, wind rustled through the straw roof, and smoke drifted upward like a prayer. Little John, her 4-year-old, tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, I'm hungry." Marie looked at the pot. The porridge inside was thin, just enough for the man and the boy. She smiled faintly. "Eat first, my love," she said gently. "I've already eaten." It wasn't true. It hadn't been true for many nights, but a mother's hunger was the quiet kind, the kind that chose silence. As John ate, Marie hummed softly, a song her mother once sang, an old lullaby about fields of wheat and the promise of another spring. It was how women survived, through song, through work, through love that expected nothing back. Her hands trembled as she stirred again, and she wondered how long strength could exist without rest. The sun outside turned red over the thatched roofs. Shadows stretched across the dirt floor, and Marie whispered to herself, "We live quietly, but we still live." At the abbey, Sister Hildegard stood before 5 young nuns. The classroom smelled of herbs, rosemary, sage, and something faintly bitter. On the table lay bundles of dried plants, tied neatly with red string. "This one," Hildegard said, pointing to a sprig of green leaves, "is tansy. It helps when a woman's body is in pain. This one, pennyroyal, soothes the breath, and this, willow bark, eases fever." The young nuns listened closely, copying the shapes of leaves into their notebooks. Hildegard's voice was calm, careful. "These are gifts from nature," she said. "Knowledge meant to heal, not to harm." One of the youngest hesitated. "But sister, Father Peter says it's forbidden to use these without his blessing." Hildegard met her eyes gently. "Sometimes," she said, "mercy cannot wait for permission." The girls exchanged quiet glances. The nun smiled. "Remember, healing is not rebellion. It is compassion." Then she lowered her voice. but never speak these lessons aloud outside this room. Some truths are safest when whispered. The air was still. Then the sound of hurried footsteps. A novice burst into the doorway, breathless. Sister Hildegard, from the village nearby. They've taken a woman, accused her of sorcery. The trial is tomorrow. The room fell silent. Hildegard felt the color drain from her face. A trial? She repeated softly. The girl nodded. They say it will be a test of faith. Hildegard closed her eyes, whispering a prayer, not for the woman's guilt or innocence, but for the world that still confused wisdom with sin. The sun melted behind the western towers of Ashford Castle, spilling gold over the stone walls until every shadow glowed red. Inside the lady's chamber, the air shimmered with warmth and scent, rose oil, beeswax, and faint smoke from a dying fire. Catherine sat on a stool, her maid standing behind her with a bowl of perfumed cloths. This was her evening ritual, not a bath, but what the court called a dry cleansing. No water touched her skin. It was too cold, too risky. Instead, the maid wiped her body gently with linen soaked in rose oil. Catherine closed her eyes. The fabric glided over her shoulders, removing the day's dust, but not its weight. When the maid finished, she began the second part, the painting of the mask. A thin layer of pale cream, smooth and cold, spread across Catherine's cheeks. It smelled faintly metallic, lead mixed with vinegar, the secret to the luminous skin admired by every noble court in Europe. Few knew it was slowly stealing their youth with each application. Catherine watched her reflection in the bronze mirror. Her skin gleamed like marble, but her pulse was weak. Beauty, in her world, was a costume worn for survival. "Bring the powder," she murmured. The maid opened a box carved with roses. Inside, tiny vials glimmered. Black powder for the eyes, red pigment for the lips, a small bottle of drops that shimmered faintly blue. Catherine picked it up. "Belladonna," the maid whispered. "Just a drop, my lady." Catherine nodded. The liquid made her pupils widen, her gaze soft, almost dreamlike, the fashion of the court. Few knew that too much would slowly steal sight. One drop, then another mask, charcoal dust along her lashes, a soft pink from crushed beetles brushed on her cheeks, a hint of color on her lips. The transformation was complete. She no longer looked tired or frightened or mortal, only composed, perfect, a statue carved for admiration, not for life. "Would you like the remedy, my lady?" the maid asked quietly. Catherine hesitated. They never said its name aloud. The remedy, a secret blend of herbs that spared a woman's life when the burden of childbearing became too great. Catherine had 3 children already. 2 had not survived infancy. The last birth had nearly taken her as well.
The physician's words echoed still. Another child might end her. And yet her husband's longing for another heir, another son, grew heavier with each passing year. "Yes," she whispered, "prepare it." The maid nodded and slipped out. Catherine sat alone, watching the sun's reflection fade from the window pane. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe freely, to feel the soft weight of her gown, the cool air on her neck. Outside, bells rang from the chapel tower. Inside, the perfume of roses thickened, sweet enough to hide the scent of fear. She touched her own reflection and murmured, "Perfection is a prison, but tonight I must wear it again."
In the small cottage by the river, twilight crept through the thatched roof, painting thin lines of silver across the room. The fire in the hearth flickered low, its light trembling over the worn wooden walls. Marie sat near it, cradling her infant daughter, rocking gently to the rhythm of the flames. Her body still weak, she moved carefully, every motion quiet and deliberate. Behind her, Thomas sat at the table, his head resting on one arm, a half-empty cup before him. The smell of ale mingled with the smoke, heavy and bitter. He mumbled to himself, words lost in the haze of weariness and pride. A son would have been better. A son could work the field. Marie didn't answer. She focused on the baby's slow breathing, counting each tiny sigh. Outside, the last light of day faded from the hills. The cottage was small, but it held all the noise of her world. The crackle of wood, the distant barking of dogs, the creak of wind through the boards. Her son, John, curled up in the corner, his eyes half closed. "Mama, are we safe tonight?" Marie hesitated, then smiled softly. "Yes, my love, sleep." It wasn't safety she could promise, only peace for a moment. Behind her, the chair scraped. Thomas stirred, lifting his head. "The food," he said. His tone was rough, tired. "Where's the meal?" Marie rose slowly. Her knees trembled, but she reached for the pot over the fire. Steam rose, warm and thin. She poured into a wooden bowl, then placed it before him. He ate without a word. She turned back to the fire, eyes on the child in her arms. The silence between them was thick as smoke. Then, a sound from outside, a sharp knock on the door. Once, twice, then a pause. Marie froze. That rhythm, 2 knocks, a pause, then one more, wasn't random. It was the signal, the one women used when someone needed help. Thomas looked up, confused. "Who's that?" "Probably Agnes, her pigs again," Marie said quickly. She hurried to the door. Outside, in the dim light, stood the old woman from the neighboring farm. Bent, wrapped in wool, her eyes sharp as flint. "Thomas," she called loudly, "your fence is breaking. The animals are loose." Thomas cursed softly, pushed himself up, and stumbled toward the door. "Again," he growled. He grabbed his coat and went outside, muttering. When the door closed behind him, the air seemed to breathe again. Agnes stepped closer to Marie, her voice low. "He'll be gone a while. Fix it if you can. And if you can't, Come to my house when the moon rises. Bring the children." Marie nodded. Her throat tightened. "Thank you." Agnes didn't answer. She simply touched Marie's arm, the touch of understanding, of silent sisterhood, and left. Marie turned back to her baby, tears burning quietly behind her eyes. In a world that gave her so little, kindness was the rarest treasure. Outside, the wind rose, sweeping through the reeds by the river. Inside, the fire glowed a little brighter. For one night more, she and her children would be safe. The night spread over the countryside like ink, swallowing the roads and fields. In the distance, the tower bells of St. Mary's Monastery rang softly. 3 slow chimes, the signal that all lights should be out. But inside one small stone chamber, a candle still burned. Its flame bent and swayed in the draught, throwing long shadows across the walls. Sister Hildegard sat at a wooden table, her cloak wrapped tight. Before her lay an old map, drawn on parchment so fragile it looked like it might crumble at her touch. On it, lines of ink connected small symbols, crosses, stars, circles, each representing a woman, a safe house, a risk. Across from her sat 3 younger sisters, their faces pale in the candlelight. "The woman's name is Sarah," Hildegard whispered. "She healed a child with honey and herbs. The priest called it witchcraft. Tomorrow they'll bring her to the river." The youngest nun trembled. "Can we stop them?" "Not by asking," Hildegard said. "Only by acting." She opened a small box. Inside were herbs, valerian, poppy seed, and mandragora root, the blend she used to put a body into deep, harmless sleep. "We'll make it seem as if she's gone before the trial," she continued. "The guards will think she's perished. When the village gathers by the water, she'll already be far away." One of the sisters frowned. "Where will she go?" Hildegard pointed to the map, a mark shaped like a rose near the southern hills. "There, a convent in Albridge. They take in women who need to disappear." Silence filled the room, heavy and reverent. Outside, the wind moaned through the cloister arches, carrying the faint scent of rain. The youngest nun reached forward. "Sister, if we're caught?" Hildegard looked at her, eyes calm, voice steady. "Then we stand together. No woman here will face the fire alone." She rolled the map, tied it with a string of linen, and tucked it beneath her robe. Then she blew out the candle. The room fell into darkness, not the darkness of fear, but of purpose. Later, under a sky veiled by clouds, Hildegard slipped through the monastery gate. Her black cloak blended with the night. In her hands, she carried a basket,
bread, bandages, and the sleeping draught. The road to the village was silent, except for the whisper of grass brushing her feet. Far ahead, a dog barked once, then stopped. She paused, scanning the fields. A flicker of movement, someone waiting by the old oak. A woman in a cloak of gray. Sarah. When their eyes met, Hildegard saw both terror and trust. "We don't have much time," Hildegard whispered. She handed her the potion. "Drink this when the bells ring again. You'll feel cold and heavy, but you must not fight it. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, voice shaking. "Why are you helping me?" Hildegard smiled faintly. "Because once someone helped me too." They said no more. The moon broke through the clouds, lighting their faces for a moment. Two women, strangers bound by the quiet rebellion of mercy. In a world that silenced them, this was how they spoke, in deeds, not words.
The bells of Ashford Castle rang softly in the distance, echoing through the corridors like slow heartbeats. In her chamber, Catherine lay on the carved oak bed, the curtains drawn tight. The fire had burned down to embers, and the scent of rose oil still lingered from earlier. The air felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She tried to breathe evenly, as if calm could protect her. Her husband entered without knocking, as he always did. His boots struck the floor with dull thuds. The smell of wine clung to his breath, mixed with the musk of the hunt. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence filled the room, commanding and cold. Catherine's heart raced, but her face stayed still. This, she told herself, was duty. The vow every noblewoman was taught before marriage: obedience without question, silence without resistance. The law, the church, even her mother, all said the same thing. A husband's will was divine. She closed her eyes and waited for it to end. It always ended. When it was over, he turned away, and soon his breathing deepened into sleep. The room was silent again, except for the whisper of wind outside. Catherine lay still, her body trembling with exhaustion. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the small cracks in the stone. 47 of them. She counted them every night. Sometimes she gave each one a name: hope, patience, endurance, as if naming them made her stronger. Tonight, her hands brushed the bedsheet and felt something damp. She froze. Slowly, she lifted her fingers. A dark stain in the flickering light. Her breath caught. Perhaps the medicine hadn't worked. Perhaps her body was breaking. But she couldn't call for help. No physician would touch a noblewoman's private wounds. That was forbidden. And if her husband discovered she was bleeding, he'd say it was her fault. Everything always was. She rose quietly, moving to the small table by the window. The moonlight filtered through the glass, pale and cold. On the table lay a cloth, a bowl of water, and a sprig of dried lavender. She pressed the cloth to her skin, feeling the sting of pain beneath the surface. For a moment, she almost wept, but no tears came. Only a whisper escaped her lips. "Please, let this end." Her reflection in the dark glass looked like someone else, a ghost of marble skin and hollow eyes. The woman she had once been, bright, curious, full of laughter, was still there, somewhere behind the mask. But tonight, all she could do was survive. When she finally lay down again, the embers had turned to ash, and in that pale silence, she realized something. The mask she wore each night wasn't just to please her husband. It was to protect what was left of herself. The village slept under a sky without stars. Clouds drifted low, pressing against the rooftops, heavy with rain. Only the faint glow from the watchtower flickered across the square. In the center stood a small wooden cage, the prison they used for the accused. Inside, Sarah sat slumped against the bars, her face pale beneath streaks of dirt. Her breath came shallow, her wrists raw where the ropes had rubbed her skin. Every sound, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind, made her flinch. She had stopped praying hours ago, not because she lost faith, but because she feared someone might hear. Down the path, 3 shadows moved silently. Hildegard led the way, her cloak trailing over the wet earth. Behind her, 2 young nuns followed, carrying a small basket between them. Inside was everything they needed: herbs, a vial of sleeping draught, linen to bind wounds. "Stay close," Hildegard whispered. "No words." The air was cold, biting. Their breath fogged in the dark as they neared the cage. The guard, a boy barely 16, sat by a dying fire, his head nodding with sleep. Hildegard glanced at him, then at the keys dangling from his belt. She motioned to the others. One of the nuns stepped forward, holding a loaf of bread. "For the guard," Hildegard murmured. The girl placed it beside him, and the boy stirred, just long enough to mumble thanks before his eyes shut again. The sleeping herbs in the bread would keep him quiet until dawn. Hildegard reached through the bars. "Sarah," she whispered. The woman stirred, eyes wide with fear. "Don't be afraid, we're here to help you." Sarah shook her head weakly. "They'll kill you if they find out," Hildegard finished softly. "Then we'll make sure they don't." She took out the small vial, its contents shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "Drink this. It will slow your heart, your breath. You'll seem gone, but you won't be. When they bury you, we'll bring you back." Sarah hesitated. The air smelt of damp earth and ashes. Finally, she nodded. "Do you promise?" Hildegard's eyes softened. "With my life." Sarah drank. Within minutes, her eyelids fluttered. Her pulse faded to a whisper. The 2 young nuns caught her gently as her body went limp. "Quickly," Hildegard said. They laid her on a cloth, brushed soot across her face, and whispered a prayer.
Forgive our deception, Lord, for it is born of mercy. Footsteps echoed from the lane. The guard captain approached with a lantern, his face grim. "Is she dead?" he demanded. Hildegard bowed her head. She refused confession. The devil took her early. The man spat. "Good riddance." He gestured to the forest. "Bury her there, no holy ground for witches." The sisters lifted the body and began the long walk to the woods. Rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops that soaked through their robes. Every footstep sank deeper into mud. In the trees, lightning flickered once, revealing their faces, solemn, pale, unyielding. When they reached the clearing, they began to dig. The earth was soft and cold. Hildegard placed Sarah down gently, arranging her hands as if in prayer. "We'll be back," she whispered, "before the first bell." As they covered her with soil, thunder rolled through the valley. The storm had begun.
Night pressed against the small cottage like a second roof, the wind combing the reeds by the river and sliding through the seams of the door. The hearth coals were dull and red, breathing in and out like a tired heart. Marie sat on the floor near the fire with her back to the rough wall, her newborn tucked into the crook of her elbow. John curled beside her with one hand resting on his mother's skirt. The cottage smelled of damp wool and ash, with a thread of sweetness from the oat porridge scraped thin from the pot. She had told the boy a story about a robin building a nest inside a knight's helmet and finding spring in winter. He had smiled, then drifted to the edge of sleep. The baby's small mouth searched again, but there was no milk left to give, not tonight. Hunger had turned Marie's body into a field after harvest, quiet, emptied, waiting for rain. She hummed a lullaby, the one her mother used to sing when fog covered the marsh and the road home vanished. The notes were soft and slow, a rope thrown into the dark for a tiny soul to hold. The child's cries thinned to whimpers, then stuttered back into fretful gasps. Marie closed her eyes and pressed the baby closer, willing the world to learn gentleness. In the corner, beneath a folded shawl, lay the small pouch Sister Hildegard had left days ago. Marie had not opened its scents. She feared the power of anything mysterious and kind in a life that had trained her to expect neither. But tonight the air felt thin, and every sound, the bench creaking, the latch sighing with the wind, seemed to say there would be no rest without help. She drew the pouch into her lap. Inside were cloth strips, a sprig of lavender tied with a blue thread, and a tiny corked vial with a smudged label in the nun's tight hand. Not a promise, only a suggestion. A soothing cordial for infants to settle breathing and soften wakeful cries. No measures were written. The old writing said only what every village mother already knew in her bones, that some nights required more lullaby than a throat could sing. Marie turned the vial in the firelight. The liquid glowed the color of tea at dusk. She thought of Hildegard's eyes, steady as morning. She thought of kindness passing from hand to hand like a candle shielded from wind. Just until dawn, she whispered to the silent room, as if answering a question no one dared to ask. The door frame gave a tired crack as the temperature dropped. Somewhere outside, a fox barked once, and the sound scattered across the fields. Marie set the vial down without opening it and instead lifted the lavender to her nose, letting the scent settle her own breath.
She leaned back and began to rock, a small tide moving the boat of her body. The baby blinked, then blinked again, the lashes fanning like wings, trying to remember how to fold. "Peace, little one," Marie said, and the words felt like prayer. Time was slow and thick. John's breathing deepened, his fingers loosening from her skirt. The coals in the hearth slumped, sighed, slumped again. At last, Marie drew the cork just enough to wet the cloth, only a trace, and touched the damp edge to the baby's lips as if anointing, not dosing, her hand steady, her heart louder than the wind. The child paused, then settled, the tiny chest lifting in an even rhythm, a surrender not to sleep but to safety. Marie exhaled, a sound almost like gratitude and almost like grief. She wrapped both children in the shawl and watched the door, listening for footsteps, listening for anything that moved like danger. Far away, the monastery bell rolled once through the valley, a low wave of iron. Perhaps the sisters were awake under that stone roof, measuring hours by mercy. Perhaps a woman named Sarah was being carried from the edge of the village into trees that remembered the shape of every secret path. Marie imagined torches dip and vanish, imagined rain blessing the leaves, imagined hands that had learned the weight of another's life and chosen to lift it anyway. She stood and crossed to the little shelf where she kept a string, a knife for bread, the 2 coins she had hidden since autumn, and a crust wrapped in cloth for tomorrow. She tied the coins into the corner of the shawl. When the moon rose higher, when the shadow of the chimney reached the door, she would go to Agnes's house, just as the old woman had said. 3 quick knocks and a pause. Not flight, not rebellion, only refuge for a few hours that could become a different morning. She looked down at the baby, asleep now with lips parted, and at John's small hand open to the world. The room had not changed, but it felt less narrow. The wind still insisted on coming in, the river still talked to itself as if nothing on land mattered. And yet, inside these 4 walls, a decision had been made. Marie tightened the shawl, kissed the child's forehead, and whispered the promise her mother had once given her. "We will reach the light." Outside, thunder rumbled, distant but certain. A storm was moving over Ashford, toward the castle, toward the abbey, toward every house where women counted the hours and stitched maps into memory. Marie lifted the latch and listened to the night, not asking permission from it this time, only asking for a path.
The rain had stopped hours ago, but the soil still breathed moisture. It clung to their skirts and gloves, to the hems of their robes, to every tremor of the hands that dug in silence. The forest around them was a cathedral of darkness, branches arching overhead like stone vaults, leaves dripping with the slow patience of night. Hildegard's lantern threw a trembling circle of light that barely reached the hole at her feet. 3 hours had passed since they had buried Sarah. The others' breaths came fast, white and ragged. "Deeper," Hildegard whispered. "Careful now." Her fingers brushed the edge of the linen shroud, cold and damp. For a heartbeat she couldn't move. What if the heart beneath it had stopped for good? What if mercy had turned to murder by miscalculation? Her hands shook. She pressed her ear to the soil and heard nothing. Then she pulled back the last layer of cloth. Sarah's face was pale, lips parted, eyes closed. Hildegard placed trembling fingers on the woman's neck. 1 second, 2, then a pulse, faint, slow, but alive. She breathes, Hildegard exhaled, a whisper half prayer. Quickly, bring the water. One of the sisters poured a few drops on Sarah's lips. Another loosened the cloth at her throat. The woman's chest rose, shallow but real. She'll wake soon, Hildegard said. We must move before dawn. The youngest nun looked up, eyes wide. How far? To St. Beatrice's convent, 4 leagues. Hildegard tied the shroud back around Sarah and helped lift her from the grave. The wet fabric clung to both women, weight of earth and salvation mixed together. They placed her in the small cart, hidden beneath branches and straw. The wheels creaked as they pushed it through the forest path, guided only by the pale thread of moonlight. Halfway to the road, dogs barked in the distance. A man's voice shouted, harsh and close. Who goes there? Torches flared at the village gate. Hildegard's heart seized. They were too near. Hide the light, she hissed. The lantern went dark. The cart stopped. Hooves clattered on stone, the priest's horse. Father Benedict. His shadow grew long across the trees. Sisters, he called, why are you abroad at this hour? Hildegard stepped forward, bowing her head, voice calm though her pulse pounded. We bring food to the sick at the mill, Father. The child there burns with fever. The priest narrowed his eyes. At midnight? He moved closer, lantern held high. Its glow skimmed over the cart, catching the faint edge of straw that covered Sarah. What's in the wagon? Linens, Hildegard replied softly. For the child. Father Benedict stared a long moment, suspicion tightening his jaw. The silence stretched so taut the night itself seemed to hold its breath. Then a gust of wind swept through, carrying the smell of smoke from the village hearths and the faint echo of the chapel bell. Benedict lowered his lantern. Very well, he said. Hurry back before sunrise. He turned his horse and vanished into the fog. Hildegard waited until the sound of hooves faded, then released the breath she had been holding. Go, she whispered. Now. The cart rolled forward again. The path climbed toward the hills, and somewhere ahead, beyond the mist and danger, waited a door that would open to a new name, a new life. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled. The storm that had swept through the forest was now crawling toward Ashford Castle. Inside its stone walls, the night was restless. The air smelled of iron and candle smoke. In the lady's chamber, Catherine woke with a sharp cry that never left her throat. Pain gripped her lower body like a tightening rope. For a moment she couldn't move. The world spun. The canopy above her blurred into a haze of black and gold. She turned her head. Lord William lay beside her, unmoving, his breath heavy with wine. She pressed a trembling hand against her side. Warmth, wetness. Her pulse raced. It wasn't the ordinary kind of bleeding. Something inside her had broken. Panic rose, but she swallowed it down. She couldn't call for help.
If her husband saw the blood, he would summon the physician, and the physician would know. They all would know. Then the whispers would begin. The wife who took medicine against God's will, the woman who defied her husband's seed. She would not live long after that. Catherine gripped the bedpost and forced herself to sit up. The fire in the grate had gone out, leaving the room wrapped in blue shadows. Every motion sent a knife of pain through her stomach, but she kept moving. Step by step, she crossed the cold floor, leaving faint drops behind her. She reached the door of her maid's chamber and tapped 3 times, pause, 2 times more. The secret rhythm. It meant, "Help me, tell no one." For a long second, nothing. Then the door opened a crack. A face appeared, lined, calm, eyes still sharp with midnight clarity. Eleanor, the old servant who had been in the castle before Catherine was born. She saw the blood. Her expression didn't change. She only whispered, "Come." Catherine leaned on her shoulder as the woman guided her inside. The small chamber smelled of herbs, wax, and old books. On a table near the window stood a bowl of boiled linen and a jar of honey dark as amber. "Lie down," Eleanor said quietly. "Don't speak. I know what this is." Catherine obeyed. The older woman moved with practiced precision, wiping away the blood, muttering a prayer under her breath, not from scripture, but from the language of midwives and healers, the words that had saved countless lives, but could damn a woman if heard by the wrong ears. Catherine winced as the linen touched her skin, but she said nothing. The pain pulsed like waves. Eleanor pressed a hand to her forehead. "You've lost much, but you'll live. You were wise to come." "If my husband wakes—" "He won't," Eleanor interrupted gently. "I saw to his wine." She gave a faint smile. "You're not the first lady who's needed silence instead of prayer." Catherine's lips trembled. "You've done this before." "More times than the priests have confessed," Eleanor replied. She poured warm water into a bowl, the steam curling between them like breath. "The world thinks men know medicine. They only know wounds of war. The rest," she said, pressing a cloth to Catherine's hand, "belongs to women." The storm broke outside, rain hammering against the shutters. Within that sound, Eleanor began to hum an old lullaby, one passed down from healer to healer. It wasn't for sleep. It was for endurance. Catherine's body trembled, but her breathing steadied with the rhythm. Between flashes of lightning, their faces glowed like 2 figures in a forgotten painting, one young and bleeding, one old and unyielding, bound together by a secret that had kept women alive for centuries. When the thunder rolled again, Eleanor whispered, "You'll rest now. By morning, no one will know but me, and I will never tell." Catherine's eyes fluttered. "Why?" The old woman looked toward the window, where rain traced rivers of silver down the glass. "Because we have to keep each other alive," she said simply.
Midnight sat on the cottage like a held breath. The river murmured beyond the reeds, and the moon, veiled by broken cloud, kept slipping in and out of sight as if it too were undecided. Marie knelt by the hearth, the last coals blinking sleepily, her newborn daughter resting against her chest, John curled under a wool shawl with his cheek to the floorboards. Thomas lay slumped at the table, one hand trapped beneath his chin, the other open near an empty cup. The room carried the day's story in faint scents: smoke, wet wool, a hint of oats, the sharp ghost of iron from the knife used earlier to cut bread. Marie listened to the many small languages of night, the window latch taking a slow breath, the roof that settled with a shy crack, the river rehearsing its old song. And in those sounds she heard a question that had no words: stay or go. She knew the laws as surely as she knew the grain of the tabletop. A wife was property in the eyes of paper and seal. To leave without leave was to be named a thief of herself. If she sought shelter at a convent, a husband could come with a priest and a constable and claim her with a signature. The world called that justice. The women called it by no name at all. Still, a door sometimes opens where none seems to be, a neighbor's hand at precisely the right moment, a path learned by moonlight, the quiet courage to knock 3 times and wait. Agnes's voice returned to her like a candle in the fog. When the moon reaches the chimney's shadow, bring the children. Not a promise of safety, only a possibility of morning. Marie drew the shawl closer around the baby and looked at Thomas, sleeping in the posture of a man who believed the house would always revolve around his breath. On the table, the knife caught a thread of moonlight and gave it back, thin as a whisper. She did not touch it. She only looked, and then looked away. In stories told in kitchens, there were nights when a woman's fear hardened into something colder, and misfortune came in the form of a stare, a horse, a cup. Those stories ended badly for everyone. A village that learned to speak in undertones, a child who asked where the sky went, a name burned by winter gossip. Marie wanted no more endings. She wanted a beginning. She pictured the road to the abbey, the hedges black as ink, the puddles that held pieces of sky, the field cross where travelers touched the wood for luck. She pictured Hildegard's face, steady, weathered by worry, luminous with the strange, practical mercy that women pass between them like bread. Perhaps Sarah was already on that road, disguised as sleep, held by hands that would not let go. If we go now, she whispered to the quiet, we become a question they cannot easily answer. She moved without hurry. First the coins, 2 thin circles she had been saving since harvest, tied into the corner of the shawl. Then the small bundle of cloth for the baby, the crust of bread, and the vial she would not use again unless the night became a wall. She slipped her feet into shoes still damp from yesterday's rain and stood very still, letting her breath find a rhythm softer than the wind. John stirred. "Mama?" he said into the wood. "Shh," she answered, and her voice made the room gentler. "We're visiting Agnes when the moon moves." He blinked up at her. "Are we in trouble?" "No," she said, and realized it was true. "We're going to borrow a morning." The chimney's shadow stretched across the door plank,
a long finger pointing the hour. Marie lifted the latch a finger's width and listened. Nothing but the river and a distant cart, maybe, or thunder sitting down on the hills. She wrapped the baby tighter, then took John's hand. Together they crossed the room in a hush that felt like snow. At the threshold, she paused and looked back, not at the man, not at the knife, but at the table gouged by years of meals and mending, at the low shelf with the needle packet, and the 3 pebbles John had collected by the river and declared to be knights. A house is not its bricks, it is the things that remember us. She pressed her palm briefly to the lintel and said to the air, "Keep what's kind, and let the rest scatter." The latch lifted cleanly. The door opened to night shaped like a corridor. The moon slid from its bandage of cloud, pale and brave. Agnes's candle, a pinprick, shone across the lane, then went dark, then shone again, the signal. Marie stepped into the cold. The grass wet her hem. The air took her breath and gave it back sharper. John squeezed her hand. The baby sighed as if agreeing to the world. Behind them, Thomas muttered something to his dreams and turned. The knife kept its small light on the table, but the moon moved on to find other metal, a buckle, a wet stone, a watchman's bell far away. Marie closed the door softly and set off down the path, counting heartbeats instead of steps. Not escape, not defiance, only the choosing of a path that led toward a door that could open. The night received them without comment. Somewhere a bell marked the hour, and the sound traveled over fields and roofs and into the hands of women who had already learned the map by feel. Marie lifted her chin to the cold and followed the faint silver line the moon had drawn across the earth, a line just wide enough for a mother, a boy, and a sleeping child.
The night held its breath a little longer before letting morning in. A gray light filtered through the cracks of the thatched roof, soft and uncertain, touching everything with the same gentle question: will you rise again today? Marie stood in the stillness, her hand tight around the wooden handle of the knife. The metal was cold, heavier than it should be, as if it knew the thoughts that had passed through her. 1 minute, 2, 5. The baby stirred in the cradle of her arm and whimpered, a small sound that cracked the silence open. Marie's fingers loosened. The knife dropped onto the table with a muted thud. She watched it as if it might move on its own, then stepped back, breathing out a long, uneven breath. She had not chosen mercy out of love. She had chosen survival out of purpose. If she ended the story here, they would write the ending for her. Another woman gone, another child forgotten. She could not let that happen. Her strength would not be a weapon. It would be a wall. She bent over the baby, tracing the tiny curve of a cheek with her rough thumb. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for bringing you into a world that doesn't yet know how to be kind. But I promise I'll teach you how to live in it anyway." The baby's breathing steadied, small chest rising and falling like waves against a quiet shore. Marie began to speak softly, almost singing, not a lullaby, but a lesson in disguise, the same way her mother had once done for her. "You'll learn the songs that heal,
she murmured, "and the signs that speak without words. You'll know which leaf cools the fever, and which flower hides its fire. You'll know the mark of safety and the path of silence." These were not fairy tales. They were the maps of survival, drawn not on parchment, but in memory. Outside, the first rooster called across the fields, its voice thin but determined. Marie smiled faintly. "See," she whispered, "someone else is awake." She wrapped the baby tighter in her shawl, kissed her forehead, and set about rebuilding the small order of mourning, stirring the ashes in the hearth, folding the blanket, pouring water into the wooden bowl. The ordinary motions were sacred in their own way, proof that she was still here, that tomorrow had come again. Each sound, the scrape of wood or the crack of a spark, felt like a heartbeat. She looked toward the door. Light seeped under it, pale gold on dirt. Somewhere beyond the walls, Agnes would be waiting, perhaps pretending to feed her hens while keeping watch for danger. A network invisible to the world, held together by whispers, glances, and courage. Marie adjusted her shawl and exhaled. Today she would not run, not yet. Today she would live, quietly, cleverly, and for someone else. The river outside began to glitter, catching the first true sunlight. It looked almost pure, as if the night had never happened. Marie knew better, but she allowed herself to believe for a moment anyway. Hope, she thought, was not light itself. It was the will to open your eyes even before the sun arrives. She turned back to the child, who blinked at the brightness creeping into the room. "That," she said softly, "is morning, and we made it here."
The moon was fading, silver draining into pale gray, when the wagon creaked along the forest road. Dew hung on every branch, and the air smelled of wet earth and prayer. Hildegard held the reins with steady hands, though her heart beat fast enough to shake the world inside her. Under the blanket of straw lay Sarah, still, silent, alive, but pretending to be otherwise. Beside her, two younger sisters clutched their rosaries so tightly the beads left marks on their palms. The road bent toward the old chapel near the village gate, and with it came the sound they had feared all night. Barking, torches, a man's voice. "Stop there!" Father Benedict's shadow appeared between the trees, haloed by torchlight. His robe swayed like a dark sail in the wind. "Sisters," he said, stepping closer, "what business keeps you from rest at such an hour?" Hildegard inhaled once, deeply, the way one does before diving into cold water. "We were gathering herbs, Father," she replied, her tone calm, respectful. "Some plants bloom only beneath the full moon. Their oils lose virtue by dawn." The priest's eyes moved to the wagon. He saw the straw shift slightly, perhaps a trick of light, perhaps a breath from the living. "You went far for such herbs," he said slowly. "This path leads to the burial fields." Hildegard bowed her head. "The soil there is rich, Father. Everything grows better near death.
even healing. For a long moment, neither spoke. The forest listened. The horses stamped once, impatient. Then Benedict took a step forward, his torch lighting the edge of Hildegard's veil. "I have heard," he murmured, "that you keep knowledge older than the church itself." Hildegard met his gaze. "Knowledge, yes, but not rebellion. We serve the same God, only through different hands." He studied her face. There was something human in his expression. Weariness, perhaps, or understanding long denied. The wind shifted. The torch sputtered. He glanced toward the straw and back again. "Thyme, sage, tansy?" he asked softly. "Yes, Father." "For fever, then, and for mercy." His eyes softened. "Go," he said, voice barely audible, "before someone else finds you." Hildegard blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Father." "No confession tonight, sister. I have none to give." He stepped aside. The path opened like a breath released. She guided the horse forward, the wheels whispering through the damp earth. Behind her, Benedict remained, a silhouette between flame and fog, watching the road disappear. When they were far enough, Hildegard let go of the breath she'd been holding. The younger nuns wept quietly, half in relief, half in disbelief. "He let us go," one whispered. Hildegard nodded. "Not all men close their eyes because they are cruel. Some do it because that's the only way they can help." The wagon rolled toward the horizon, where dawn waited patiently to be born. The first light touched the forest leaves, turning dew into trembling pearls. Sarah stirred under the straw, whispering hoarsely, "Are we safe?" Hildegard reached down and touched her hand. "Not yet," she said, "but we are alive, and for now, that's enough."
The first light of morning crept through the colored glass of Ashford Castle, scattering soft rainbows across the stone floor. Catherine stirred in her bed, weak but breathing. The room smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, proof that Eleanor had stayed through the night. A bowl of cool water sat beside her, a single white rose floating on its surface. "You'll live," Eleanor said softly from the chair near the hearth, "but you must rest. You lost much." Catherine blinked at her, eyes glassy, half lost between sleep and realization. "It's morning?" "It is," the woman replied. "A new day always comes, my lady, even when the night tries to keep it." Catherine's gaze wandered to the window, where the sun was pushing its way through the clouds. The world looked almost gentle again. Somewhere below, the bells of the chapel began to ring, slow, solemn, like the beating of an old heart. Catherine closed her eyes. Each chime seemed to tell her a truth she had long ignored, that silence was not safety, and endurance was not obedience. "Eleanor," she murmured, "if I hadn't had you, then someone else would have come. We look after each other. That's how we survive." She stood, smoothing her apron. "You're not the first to walk through the dark. But perhaps if you speak one day, fewer will have to." Catherine let the words sink in. For the first time, they did not sound like rebellion. They sounded like faith.
faith not in heaven, but in the women still living on earth. The scent of rosemary drifted up from the coals, clean and sharp. Catherine thought of Marie, the peasant woman she had tried to help, of Hildegard, somewhere beyond the walls, riding through dawn with secrets in her hands, of the hundreds of women unseen, unnamed, yet bound together by invisible threads, threads that passed from hand to hand, mother to daughter, sister to sister. 50 secrets, 50 ways to keep breathing. Eleanor turned at the door, and 50 more waiting to be learned. She smiled. Now sleep, my lady. The world will ask enough of you when you wake. Catherine nodded. As she drifted, the sunlight reached her pillow, warm and forgiving. She dreamed, not of fear, but of a field of women standing together in morning light, faces turned toward a sky that no longer hid its mercy. Somewhere far away, a cart rolled toward the safety of another abbey. A baby's cry rose from a cottage where the fire had just been lit. And in a quiet chamber, a lady breathed through pain and began to heal. Morning had arrived not as a miracle, but as a choice made by every woman who refused to disappear.